What is going on, everyone? Taylor Collis here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at PrizePicks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of CLNS Media. More from them later. But for now, I am joined by my good friend, the Athletics' Jeff Howe, to talk about the Pats' new regime, trade rumors, his takeaways from the combine, all that good stuff. Has all that good info. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, though, first, how you doing, Jeff? Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Doing well. No complaints here. Hope you're doing well too. Or I mean, we crossed paths last week, so I know you're doing well, but it's good to see you.
Likewise, buddy. All right, so the last time I had John, it was right after Mayo got hired. So it was kind of when everything was just hitting the ground. There wasn't like the new staff and everything, but now we know what the staff looks like. We have a better idea what the front office looks like. Elliott Wolf looking like the de facto general manager. So I've got to ask, from your perspective, how are you feeling about the Patriots' new regime so far? There's still a long way to go, but now that we kind of know which pieces are in place, we've gotten to hear from Gerard Mayo a couple of times, heard from Elliott Wolf at the Combine. What are you thinking about the direction they're heading in?
Well, I like what Mayo has done in putting his staff together. I mean, there was certainly a lot of question marks, and there's some unproven commodities there, no doubt about it. And that's usually going to be the case with a new regime. But like considering the unique circumstances, like, you know, it's one thing for a first-time head coach to go to another place and then be able to take a few guys with him. It's another thing for you to just stay there and to get that internal promotion and to then try to figure out a staff or navigate the staff hirings on your own. I think that's sort of a fascinating dynamic. There's a good blend of continuity and some new voices, especially on offense, which is obviously a necessity. I love the fact that they got Dante Hightower on staff. I mean, he's truly like one of the most impressive players I've ever covered. And I always knew that he had that natural ability to be a coach or to lead and teach and everything that being a coach entails. I was always curious if that was ever really going to be his journey, and to see him link up with Mayo, I think it's just a really cool story. In terms of the front office, if they weren't going to go outside, and when I say outside, I mean a familiar voice, like a Patriots voice from outside, because you need to have that symmetry with Mayo. I thought Elliott Wolf was the exact right candidate to promote. So I think they're in good hands there. I think there probably will be some sort of level of shakeup in May or after the draft. I don't expect it to be anything massive, but I like the direction they're heading.
And speaking of Wolf, I've seen some reports saying that there's a chance that he isn't going to be the long-term answer general manager, but we also know that like he's changing the grading system. It seems like philosophically they're going through a pretty significant shift. So what's your impression of that situation? Do you think that, you know, this is more of a prove it year in terms of like, you know, you got to prove yourself, or do you think it's more like do what you've been doing and it would take something pretty drastic for the Patriots to change directions in terms of their leadership at the front office?
I think it would take something pretty drastic. I just don't see – I wouldn't understand the strategy of promoting Wolf and then kind of just taking everything away from him. I mean, this is, you know, you talk about like the football season on the field. We know when that is. This is now front office season. And these guys are going to go through the most important 2 to 3 months of their entire calendar year. I mean, they're coming up on their de facto Super Bowl. And you get to free agency and the draft. And of course, there's going to be Gerard Mayo's vision and what he wants to put on the field, but that has to be aligned with the front office. And it doesn't matter who's making the final decision. Some of that could be overblown anyway. Who has the final say? I mean, the amount of arguments coaches and GMs like-minded have anyway is few and far between. But you're not just going to allow Wolf to run the staff, the executive office, and then just make some massive change after the draft. I mean, like, you know, if they brought in, let's say, I don't know, I'm just going to throw out these names because they're familiar with everybody. If they brought in a Dave Ziegler or a Bob Quinn or a James Lifford or somebody who has some Patriots history, it would be strange to go that route after allowing Wolf to run the show during the most important stretch. So I would expect this to be a normal timeline. You know, when you hire a coach and a GM or whatever you're going to call Wolf, you're going to give them a minimum of 2 years, ideally a minimum of 3, and then just sort of see where it goes from there.
When it comes to titles, I understand him being the de facto general manager because once you want to give him the title, you got to go through the interview process. You have to satisfy the Rooney Rule, all those things. The fact that he's still the director of scouting, when it seems pretty clear that that's really what Matt Groh's doing. And then Ellie Wolf is kind of more director of player personnel. Do you have any insight into why that is exactly? Is it just kind of like a small technicality thing where it's like, all right, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. It's not a big deal? Because that seems kind of confusing for me.
Yeah, you have every right to be confused. I mean, I'm still a little confused too. If you know that he's your guy, if you're going to put him in front of the media multiple times, be the face of the combine press conference, I mean, we all know what is going on here. So I would guess it's just some sort of technicality. And again, maybe round out the staff. And once they get all their voices in there, they kind of determine what the best title is for everybody. And I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things, like if we're still having this conversation June 15th, then I'll sit here and say, I don't know what the hell's going on. But right now, I lean toward wanting to give them the benefit of the doubt.
That makes perfect sense. All right. So, like you said, we got to link up at the combine a little bit. I know you were very busy. You were there the whole week. God bless you, man. It was my first year. I didn't know what I was getting myself into and quickly realized it is its own beast. But I'm curious, what were your big takeaways? You know, you got to talk to a lot of people, get some insights. What did you learn from a Patriots perspective from your time last week at the combine?
I really liked how they were like in depth on like the backup inside linebacker market. And
I was like, all right, I'll let you go. I want to see where this is headed.
I can feel your eyes just rolling out of the back of your head on that one.
Not to you, buddy. Never.
I'm not going to overcomplicate this. Like they're hot on the quarterbacks, and I would expect them to go quarterback at 3. And I think that's a really important decision because I'm big on making sure you don't force it. You don't make the wrong pick. You don't take a quarterback at 3 just because you need a quarterback and you happen to have a high pick. Like you can't reach at that position because a miss, as we know, can set your franchise back a considerable amount, years. And if they do it back to back, you know, I don't necessarily want to say Mac Jones was a miss. The development aspect of it was as big of a miss as we've ever seen. But if you miss, I guess, on back-to-back first-round quarterbacks, I mean, again, we're talking repercussions that could last a long, long time, potentially over the course of multiple regimes. But when you've got the comfortability aspect with Jaden Daniels and Drake May, whoever they end up leftover with, leftover is a bad way to put it because those are great players or the potential to be great players. But whoever is there at 3 remaining on the board, I think is going to be a really exciting prospect for them. I really went into this, you know, the last time we talked, I would assume, I certainly know how I felt the last time we talked. Like I wasn't quite sure that Jaden Daniels is going to work his way into that mix at 3. So I thought they were in a spot where it's like, okay, you still need a left tackle. You still need a wide receiver. And there are some really good options for them there at 3, or even if they want to trade back to like 6, you're still going to get a top tier tackler or wide receiver. So they were in a good spot there. But the fact that they have gotten to the point, and I believe in the process just because the amount of people I've spoken to from other teams who are very high on both May and Daniels, I think they're in a really good spot to make a franchise-changing decision.
And did you get any insight into how they do feel about the way they're going to address that offensive tackle and wide receiver position? Because I think with the buzz and everything, it feels like Jaden is pretty much locked into the top 3, but they still do have those pretty glaring holes at tackle. They talked about weaponizing the offense. Are they saying like, all right, we're probably going to go offense heavy? And again, whatever you hear, and I'm not trying to put any words in your mouth or anything like that, but do they have any kind of impressions on what they want to do outside of just the quarterback position?
I mean, it better not be duct tape again, because that's just, they've seen why that fails. And the offensive line position is just such like I've been kind of harping on this because this info's kind of been new to me over the last 2 or 3 years as I've kind of expanded my reach around the league. But like every team needs offensive linemen. They might have 5 starters and they still need an offensive lineman. Like every team is always trying to improve that area. And the Patriots are starting from really a negative area because they need to improve multiple positions, add another one if they lose Onwenu. So I think losing Onwenu, I mean, yes, how I feel about the new regime. If they lose Onwenu to a contract that isn't absurd or some historic deal, you know, like when they lost Nate Solder or Trent Brown the first time, like those were historic deals and you can kind of understand why they were parting there. The line was also a strength and all that other stuff at that point. But
good old days.
Yeah, if you lose Onwenu to a deal that is not like so far above market value, then I think that would be a massive mistake. And then, you know, there are some names out there. Tyron Smith, of course, is going to be an attractive one. You just have to hope, if you're a team that signs him, that he stays healthy. And then, I mean, try to take a big swing maybe in the second round. It is a sort of deep tackle class, and I say that because normally the trends have shown that you're not necessarily going to get a Pro Bowl caliber player, which is what you want at the tackle spot. You're not usually going to get a Pro Bowl caliber player in the bottom half of the first round. I think that possibility might exist in the top 45 to 50 picks this year. Now, again, it's early March, so we think everybody in the draft is going to be a Pro Bowler. But I think this is a good class to address that. You want to make sure you get these stopgap guys, or even just not necessarily stopgap, but like well-paid guys who are going to be solutions for 2 years. And you want to make sure you draft and develop another guy who can help you long-term, because, man, you just can't compromise that position any longer.
Yeah, draft and develop seems to be the motto, but when you got holes that are this glaring, I wouldn't say duct tape, but you do have to find some kind of veterans, although the market isn't exactly flush with talent, but somebody who can at least hold down the fort while those guys do develop. Kind of retracing back to the quarterbacks, did you get an impression on whether they're leaning towards, Caleb Williams probably out of their sweepstakes, but Drake May and Jaden Daniels, whether they're leaning one way or another, what they're kind of feeling about either one of those prospects? Because we got to hear him at the podium. I was, maybe not blown away, but right under with Drake May. I was really impressed with, the competitiveness. He's talking about his toughness, the accountability. I really like what he had to say, especially with building relationships. We hear that so much in this new regime that, it seems like they're trying to do a better job of making people, making those bonds so that they know that they want to play for this team. Jaden Daniels, a little bit more low key, like California kid. I spent a couple years in LA. I understand it's a totally different vibe there, but he also said, I'd like to bring them back to, respectability and all the respect and everything for Tom Brady. So did you get an impression one way or the other on how the team's feeling about those guys?
Well, I think, starting with Caleb Williams, assuming the Bears are comfortable with him, that's going to be the pick. And I would assume they're not going to overthink that. And if it's not going to be Caleb Williams for the Bears, they're not going to have a hard time selling that pick, whether it's to Washington or New England or however that process plays out. But I think we need to operate under the assumption it's Caleb Williams 1, and then either May or Daniels at 2 and 3, however that order shakes out. Now, they're in an interesting spot, and it kind of brings back memories to last year when I was trying to figure out, all right, what are you going to do at the top of the draft? And I asked teams, Bryce Young, Stroud, Richardson, what have you. It was more about Young and Stroud at that point. And somebody said to me, I'd rather be the Sonics and take Kevin Durant rather than, having that Greg Oden pick or trying to figure out that whole situation. The Patriots are in a similar spot where the pressure is sort of off. And when you have a top pick, they're fortunate to be in that spot with the third pick, because usually it is just 1 and 2 and that's where it's capped. But, they just get to take the guy who's there. And if you're comfortable with all three, that's kind of makes it easy for you, because you can't take the wrong one. It's like, well, hands are tied. I wasn't going to trade 2 first-round picks to move up or what have you. That's not an excuse for missing on a franchise quarterback. It's just the nature of the business. But you want to look at they're two very different types of quarterbacks for a lot of different reasons. Now, May is somebody that was in that conversation for a lot longer of a period of time. He was viewed as a top 2 pick really early last college football season. Starts off with the frame, 6'4", 230, or whatever he ends up officially measuring in at during his pro day or these top 30 visits. Has a Justin Herbert arm. That's become cliche at this point, but everybody's talking about that. And when you're in the Northeast, especially in New England, you want a bigger framed player who can really cut the ball through the wind when it's December, January. Those are really important attributes. Now, the negative side is he's got several games from last season where the tape wasn't good. And in some instances was bad. And so inconsistent is a fair way to describe it. And it was against ACC defenses. And I've talked to teams that have brought those elements up. And it's like, okay, that is a concern. Now, how can you make sure that he wasn't slipping into, a spot where that's going to spiral in the NFL? But the overall attributes are there where there's enough qualities to like about him. Now with Daniels, the thing that everybody keeps talking about, the ones who really love him, and I've talked to teams that or people with other teams who have ranked Daniels above May. And a major reason why is the improvement over the last 2 years, the progress over the last 2 years since he went from Arizona State to LSU. And that's really got teams salivating. Okay, if he can improve this much at LSU, against SEC defenses, what is his potential in the NFL? I mean, is it as high as this guy could be the best quarterback in the draft 5 years from now when all is said and done? And you sit here wondering, how was he not taken higher? Now, if you've got that trajectory, again, that's a big thing for front offices. And he's, another cliche comparison, he's got that running style that's similar to or comparable to Lamar Jackson. Difference is the frame. Lamar Jackson is a lot more physically well put together. He's got a lot more of a muscular build. And, that's a big reason why he's so tough to bring down. Whereas Daniels is if he measured in, I talked to teams who thought he was going to be in the 6'3", just a tick north of 6'3". I think he's listed at 6'4", 210 at LSU. Probably was going to weigh in closer to 200 pounds. I would guess he's probably put off the measurements so he could put on a few more pounds in time for his pro day, which is fine. I mean, if he measures in at 205, maybe that alleviates some concerns. But, going back to the May thing and having that big rocket-armed quarterback in the Northeast, I asked people who would know, is that a concern to have somebody like Daniels who has that tinier frame or the slimmer frame? Right. Is that a concern if you're in New England? And I got immediately shot down. And these were people who would tell me, yeah, that is a concern. Like, that is a problem. And they just liked all of the other attributes and thought those outweighed, for no pun intended, the frame issues. But with Daniels, he's got a good arm. It's not as good as the top two guys, but it's good enough. And they just want to see him anticipate and see the field better. You can usually say that for just about every quarterback who's coming into the NFL. But the fact that he is so elusive and can scramble and can create plays off schedule, that's going to buy him time as he kind of learns to become a better pocket passer, which I think is exciting because that means that, barring a catastrophic training camp, he's probably going to be your week 1 starter.
And it's interesting because their trajectories just went in opposite directions, where Jaden wasn't even in the conversation of being one of the top quarterbacks taken, obviously skyrocketed his stock with a great season. And then Drake May, really good in 2022, like you said, came in as a top 2 quarterback. But then I think you could argue that Josh Downs is probably better than Tez Walker, didn't have a lot of NFL talent around him. And you saw there was kind of that decline where, you could make up any excuse you want. But at the end of the day, the results are what they are. So I am curious, just to be thorough here, do you think it's even a realistic chance that the Patriots try to trade up to make sure they can get whatever guy they feel most comfortable with? Or is it just like, what, these are 3 good quarterbacks, they got a lot of holes, it's probably not really on the table?
I would guess, and this is just my opinion here, this is not based on any intel, I would guess they're fine staying put. Now, if you think that there is a legit tier between that second quarterback and that third quarterback, and you think that tier is worth the 34th pick, then you know what? Like, if you get your guy, nobody's ever going to care about how much you paid to move up. Now, Washington would have every right to say, all right, yeah, if we're moving from 2 to 3, we also want next year's 1. I don't take 34 off the table. Then I'd sit there and be like, well, next year's 1 has a pretty good chance of being a top 10 pick as well. Right. So that's got to be a guy that you are absolutely fully committed to being in love with. As your franchise guy, like, you can't miss, because we talk about missing on one player. You miss on a player and then you lose next year's first round pick as part of that. That's a dangerous proposition.
That's a situation where Elliott Wolf, maybe his long-term prospects might not look too good if he pulls the trigger on that and it doesn't work out. All right, we got a lot more coming up, but first we got to show some love to our friends at PrizePicks. Be right back. Football season may be over, but the action on the floor is heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. Get in on the excitement with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. Want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like Meek Mill and Sugar Sean O'Malley? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. PrizePicks even offers injury insurance so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and doesn't return in the second, that player projection won't count against you and the rest of your entries stays live. With Jason Tatum going for the MVP, I'm taking more on his points and rebounds. Download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, so moving on from draft prospect talk to free agent talk. The Patriots have made it very clear, not only that they want to spend with that $100 million, maybe not burn some cash because Mayo kind of walked that one back a little bit, but they did say they want to weaponize the offense, and reports indicated that they would like to get at least one elite defender. Now, I'm not sure how many of those are really left on the market, but I am curious, do you think there are some realistic options for the Patriots to get some legitimate difference maker? Maybe not elite, maybe not the top tier of guys where they really, really scare you, but at least some guys who can, be contributors kind of maybe like a step above, say, a Kendrick Bourne on either side of the ball.
Well, I think offensively, Calvin Ridley's a guy you want to see if you can overextend for. Now, I think Jacksonville is going to try to make it very difficult for him to leave because I know they really like him. But in terms of the wide receiver market, man, like if you were a team in need of a veteran receiver, Tuesday was a bad day for you. So it's Calvin Ridley, and then you've got to figure out if Hollywood Brown deserves to be in that conversation. And then it's a whole bunch of guys who probably have a ceiling as a number 2 receiver, but they're fringe 2 and 3. And then it's how out of whack can you allow your cap dynamics to get? So I think you start with Ridley and figure out what his price tag is. Now, there's going to be a lot of competition because there's a lot of teams that are going to be thinking the same way. And, quite frankly, this is a tough reality where if you're offering a comparable contract and as a team that it has a chance to win some games next year, he's probably going to go to the team that's going to win some games. So it's a tough spot. It's like, I would get really aggressive. I would strongly consider $20 million a year for somebody like Ridley. Mm-hmm. But who knows how out of whack it gets. I mean, if there's 25 is sort of that magical number right now. And I'm not sure I would go anywhere close to that with Ridley, who's like, I'm not sure I would go close to that with anybody who is not an absolute bona fide, true number 1 wide receiver. No questions, no debate, none of that. So they're in a weird spot there. And then it's like, all right, you start to filter down to like Gabe Davis or Darnell Mooney or Curtis Samuel. And, if they're in that $8 to $12 million range and you think that, okay, this is a way that they can be used, can make him productive, you can really get the most bang for your buck, you can get him, let's say 70 touches a year, then you got to really consider that. But like, if that 8 to 12 range starts creeping toward 15 because of what the market is, the supply and the demand, then you just got to say, well, now it's time to start figure out like, who can you draft? Are the Broncos going to give up any of those guys or whatever it is? I mean, it's about time to start getting creative. On the defensive side, I think Christian Wilkins is a fascinating proposition. Mm-hmm. The one thing that would, just looking at, you put him in there next to Barmore, you've got Judon, you get another pass rusher or 2. It doesn't even have to be high-level guys, but like that would be an outstanding front. The question is, how much can you invest in the defensive tackle spot with Barmore coming up soon? And, if you have 2 extremely highly paid defensive tackles, is that necessarily the best way to allocate your cap resources? So then you look at, okay, like rather than him, I believe DJ Reader, is a free agent, you get like a moderately priced defensive tackle, and then you pair those guys with Chase Young. And, if like Keon White can develop next year, consider retaining Josh Uche and try to use him a little better. You would be able to speak much more eloquently about that in their usage than I can from sort of a 30,000 foot view, which has sort of changed for me over the years. But, just going off of general perception there.
You got bigger fish to fry. I got time. I dig in a film. That's my thing.
They're not necessarily bigger fish. They're just different fish.
All right. Humble as always. Okay. All right. Actually, I was curious because you mentioned the Broncos receivers. So we did see the report that Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy are guys that can move on from. Jerry Jeudy likely through trade, although, based on how that's gone the past couple of years, I'm not really sure how realistic that's going to be. But Cortland Sutton, does it seem like a realistic possibility that he could actually hit the market? And if so, you'd have to think he's probably going to shoot to the top of the free agent pile, right?
I would rule out nothing. Now that Justin Simmons was released, a very clear byproduct of the Russell Wilson experiment going disastrously wrong and trying to recalibrate the books. Justin Simmons is still like, he's not the Justin Simmons of a few years ago, but he's still a damn good safety. And as quality of a human being as there is in the league, an outstanding leader. if you're willing to part with him because of his cap number, I take absolutely nothing off the table with the Broncos. So I could see either one of those guys being available for whatever reason. I mean, this is going to be a massive reset. Their ceiling next season is very low because you've just got, like, economically, you just can't overcome, depending on how they designate that release, you can't overcome having that much dead money on the books before you even hit free agency.
Sticking to AFC West now, I saw a report that L'Jarius Sneed is someone, obviously, once he got tagged, it seemed like they were probably going to try to trade him. But I saw that the Patriots were linked, and there's a team that was trying to inquire about his services. I'm curious, do you know what it would potentially take to get him out of Kansas City? Because you got to think if it's something like, a middle day 2 pick, that's pretty intriguing for a guy who would make a damn good cornerback duo with Christian Gonzalez.
Yeah. Well, I think he would be the number one, but like, you franchise a guy, like, unless it's an elite quarterback, and even those examples are few, and might be none. But like, if you franchise a guy, nobody's giving up 2 first-round picks for him. So you franchise a cornerback and you say, all right, you know what? You're free to explore the trade market, do what you got to do. I would guess that is more about the Chiefs using a negotiating tactic to say, all right, the Patriots have done this a million times in the past. Go out, find your worth. If you find a deal that, we're willing to match, we're going to keep you here. And that's good because or not necessarily match, because nobody's going to present an offer sheet and just give the Chiefs 2 first-round picks. But if a team steps up and says, all right, Kansas City, we're willing to give you a first-rounder, we're going to open the negotiations, then, see what that's going to be. And you're honest with your player and say, again, like, all right, if they offer you something we're willing to match, then we're going to match it. Otherwise, we'll give you up for a first-round pick. Big asterisk here in New England, nobody's giving up the 3rd pick for a cornerback. So if then it comes down to, is he really worth the 34th pick and the contract? I mean, that's a massive, massive price to pay. But I think because he's such a good player, and, there just is probably going to be better fits just in terms of draft placement and what teams need. Like, yeah, it's exciting to think about the fact of putting him in the secondary there with Gonzalez and seeing what that potential could be. But it's such a heavy price tag. I don't know if it's overly realistic. It's just like, now again, who knows? Maybe Kansas City says, hey, you know what? We can't fit you under the books, and you're free to leave. Find the deal that you want, and we'll just try to get the best we can get. And if that filters down to a 3rd-round pick or whatever, then hey, go for it.
I got so excited at the idea of him potentially coming to the Pats once the tag happened. It was a little sad, I'll be honest. Yeah. But hey, let's hope that he can get some good money, and whatever team gets him, ideally New England, doesn't have to pay too hefty of a price in terms of draft capital. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. As always, appreciate your time. Please, I think the people know where they can find you by now, but let them know what great stuff you got coming down the pipeline that we should be looking out for.
Well, thank you. Just kind of right now working on that safety market, trying to figure out what kind of trend we're looking at. And I know that hits a little close to home with Kyle Duggar, but the last few days, the safeties have sort of been the story. So trying to figure out what the trend is here. I think I've uncovered a couple things, but depending on how much I'm able to write today at my daughter's soccer practice, you might see that as early as Friday morning. Maybe it's going to be Saturday. I don't know. Maybe like 72 very important players get cut in the next few hours, and I can't write until May, but we'll figure it out.
Elite multitasker. Actually, you do bring up Duggar. Now that obviously with Justin Simmons and everything, I'm going to kind of throw one in here. How does that affect him? Do you think he needs to just sign the deal that he got right now and try to secure that $13 million? Because it seems like with the way things are going, he could be making potentially even less than we initially thought.
That's a really good question, because I thought when, at the start of free agency, I can't remember how I had the winner. I did a winners and losers story of free agency, and it was just a handful of players or teams or situations. And it seemed like Xavier McKinney was like a big winner because he was the clear-cut best safety who was completely free to sign without any, stipulations there. And now all of a sudden, you do get Duggar, who, can be had without draft compensation. Now there are some complications with the transition tag, and teams are probably going to prioritize elsewhere because they don't want to wait for the possibility of the 5-day matching period or whatever. But then you throw in Justin Simmons, and Poyer and, May and Diggs. There's a handful of pretty attractive safeties out there, and that's only going to reduce the market. But Duggar he's younger, a little more untapped potential, whereas a lot of the safeties who have been released over the last few days, most of them, I believe, are on the north side of 30. So that's typically scary. So, in terms of what Duggar should do, it's hard for me to say, what's the best strategy right now. Ideally, you don't want him on the books next year for $13 million. So I would expect them to keep negotiating to try to find something to lower that hit and keep him around long-term and happy. Every new regime is going to want to show the guys in that locker room that if you've been a productive player for this team and this organization, and I say new, obviously they're familiar, so it goes back to that unique situation, but they want to show guys that you're going to be rewarded. And if you've done a good job, we're going to choose you over an outsider if possible. And that's why I think they should be, in my opinion, aggressive with Duggar and Onwenu and making sure those guys stick around for as long as possible.
Any thoughts on the progress for Onwenu? Because he's got another really interesting situation representing himself, and you thought the tag was going to go to him, if anybody, considering the positional value and his age. Do you feel like because they did tag Duggar, maybe it's a better chance an extension's coming? Or do you think the Patriots are saying, hey, we don't really want to pay you like a pure tackle, so maybe see if anybody will, and we'll try to match if we can?
Yeah, I was surprised because I definitely would have predicted Onwenu got the tag before Duggar. So the only thing we can assume, and they've been very tight-lipped about this. So this is not, again, I like to preface this as I'm not reporting this. But yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is they have to feel confident that they're going to be able to secure him before the negotiating window on Monday. Again, if they don't, barring some sort of over-the-top contract, because I think he's the best offensive lineman on the market right now and somebody they absolutely cannot afford to lose, they've got to make sure that they can keep him around. Unless there's something I'm just missing about the situation right now. He's got to be a high-priority free agent.
Last one. I promise I'll get you out of here. This is a good question. I just want to bring this one up. Any chance that Chris Jones isn't in Kansas City in 2024?
Yeah. I think there is. Just because of the way the contract negotiations have gone with him in the past and wanting to, I would assume, be the highest paid defensive lineman in history, even if that eventually gets trumped by Micah Parsons. He's an outstanding player. He's worked his way into the Hall of Fame conversation over the last year. And when I say last year, I think he worked his way into the conversation. Now I think he's probably a no-doubter.
Three-time Super Bowl champion, best player on that defense. That's a pretty good resume.
For sure. I've heard from other teams, they say that, hey, he doesn't show up 100% of the time.
That's true.
On
the run defense. Now, the run defense, it's hard to ignore that. Yeah, agreed.
But when he does show up, he's unblockable, and you can put three guys in front of him. So you kind of, when you got a player who's that good, you kind of, if it's the motor that's hitting at 70%, then that's still a pretty acceptable motor. But you know what? You have to wonder, how does that impact how Kansas City looks at him? Well, they don't want to lose him. He's an important player, but he's got 3 Super Bowls, and that could change priorities. He could sit there and say, I've won what I've won. My legacy is secure. I'm going to be in Canton 5 years or within 5 to 7 years of my retirement. Now it's time to set up my great-great-grandkids and see what type of contract he can get. And, Kansas City let Tyreek Hill go in that trade a few years ago, and he looked like an irreplaceable player. And to an extent, he was. But there they are every single year. And this was as good of a year as any to write off the Chiefs midway through the season, late in the season. And Patrick Mahomes showed that it doesn't matter where the rest of the roster is, he can still deliver. And I would think it's a small possibility, but I think the possibility exists that he could test the market.
There it goes. Keep your fingers crossed, Pats Nation. All right, Jeff, I'm going to let you go. Get ready for your daughter's soccer game. Best of luck to you and her. Thank you all for watching, as always. Now, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we will see you next time. Peace, everybody.